So, in coasting around the gold of the loop of the ring to get to the gemstone, um, language theories, semiotic theories seem to run into a difficulty which is characteristic of the one Wittgenstein spoke of. Um, Wittgenstein, who philosophized by saying, let's not philosophize, let's just speak normally. Apparently, I interpret that to mean that somehow when we're speaking straightforwardly, this is the most real and the most powerful sense of speaking the truth. But on the other hand, Wittgenstein wrote many things which are somewhat abstruse, but one could say he was just speaking to himself normally because he understood what he said straightforwardly, because not everything. So for instance, like Heidegger was, not everything can be stated at once, and an example of that is Heidegger was criticized for having this lecture series on Plato's Sophist, where he spent the first half of the course or more on Aristotle, and it was very laborious. But what he wanted to do is give the students a run through of the main thinking he'd run through in order to make the thinking on the sophist appear the same to them, so they could see what he saw in it. Therefore, there's some sense in saying language which seems abstruse in philosophic investigations of Wittgenstein may not be so for him, and that kind of links with Leo Strauss's insistence on beginning with the citizen's understanding, which we all have just by virtue of growing into society. And for instance, that's used to criticize such things as that if you have a biologist, say in the life sciences building or whatnot, looking through through a magnifying glass or through some apparatus at some object of their study, prior to learning how to do that, they had to be an ordinary person. I suppose in the extreme, the strongest statement of that is that if physics and mathematics is taken to be the language of the universe, as Galileo put forward, although perhaps he was just speaking of mechanics, a certain part of mathematics. But in any case, there's nobody who has for their first language mathematics, but they start with the ordinary speech, and then they go to these other ways of comprehending. Wittgenstein's theory is basically fairly straightforward, and it reminds of what Plato says about these problems of the third man and of the participation, and that you say I have a word such as coastal redwood tree, and there's an image that goes with it. And if you want to ask how the word and the image go together, what can you do? Make a second image which shows the two of them on the same ground, and then would you need a third, and so forth, and then you get something like Russell's problem of the set of all sets, which incidentally, just out of interest, that these sometimes very simple but also in a way abstruse problems reach into the furthest points of the culture, so that and of the activity of that culture being science, and so that question of the set of all sets, then, even not wrong, I've never been able to understand, although I've seen several presentations on this Gödel's incompleteness theorem, to understand it with any adequacy. But I believe this question of set of all sets goes into it in some way, And this problem is still taken very seriously in the math departments and pure math, and it also has something to do with, is always there for the physicists back behind their practical activity, um, or their activity that aims at coming into practice. So these problems are that seem to be small verbal problems almost tend to reach into all of human doings. And so I think this problem in Wittgenstein of language parallels with Heidegger's understanding when he makes his phrase, language is the house of being. So this makes a distinction then between language and the house of being and what it's housed, and it gives us to understand a number of separate kinds of things or separate ideas, such that it seems to me in Heidegger's sense, we then must see that we're dealing here with beings, or with the ontic in this sense. We can't get to what we want to say when we speak of being properly. There's a language problem in Heidegger which is similar to, at least in some formal structural sense, to what Wittgenstein says is that we're flies in the fly bottle who can't get out of the fly bottle. This is obvious also, I think, from Heidegger's point of view, in that the different languages are different. So the Japanese language, culture, and world are different than the other worlds. Therefore, there's more than one world. Therefore, this isn't simply the pure unity of being, but it's something differentiated within being, or however one wants to state that. So what I wanted to get into here on this ground is this question of how does language as the question about words come in? And is language as the question about words actually the problem with the technological essence? This is what I think, because Gadamer says, for instance, that Heidegger thought that Plato was brought out this constructor god. But basically, if you look at how the beginnings in Athens are, and how the understanding of philosophy which Zizek still holds, that we're asking ourselves what words mean, this has some implications for the onticness, like, because of the primariness of a particular understanding of words. So, I mean, logos means speech initially, but it doesn't. Logos is glossa is language. So we do have two words there, and it's not clear absolutely if Heidegger speaks all the time of Sprache or language, whether he would also wants to speak of glossa rather than logos, or if rather that logos as speech is to be differentiated from the Platonic constructor logos, which cropped up already in the first pre-Platonics, I think, already in Anaximander, who Heidegger says first raised his eyes. But let's look at how that works in a more tangible sense, like the de facto history of it. How did that happen? So there's, and it's kind of what I was calling the genetic circle too. It's this dizzying sense with regard to what words mean. So you come aware that there's something called Aristos, or the best people, or Leo Strauss calls this Aristos in connection to aristocrat. That the people in the polis of Athens became aware of this, and then when in the Politeia, for instance, in the Republic, when we're asking, when Socrates and Adeimantus and Thrasymachus and so on are asking into what the uh, best idea of justice is, or they don't even say idea, but what the best Aristos dike is, they presuppose this difficulty that initially Aristos means something like the people, let's say to make it a little closer to us, like people going to the Metropolitan Opera to listen to Caruso, who sit in the diamond horseshoe in the balconies, which is to say the place where the quote unquote better sort would sit, as Leo Strauss glosses Aristos for a modern sensibility. So, or then you could even stretch that out and say somebody like Ivanka Trump is the better sort. So does that mean that she's actually the best example of a human being in the society? You see, so this question is already there in the word Aristos, as it first gets used by Socrates when he's asking about how we should understand a given word. Then you could see how suddenly click, 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 you get a few motions in a certain direction and somebody tries to fix down the definition there. Point this way, point this way, point this way. And then you could see where there's a difficulty in just going to a dictionary to ask the question, like, what is justice? Um, so in this way, and then of course, already we have, you can notice how difficult it is to read a text with any real sense, such as the Republic, because you also have the fact that the main proponent of that dialogue is known for his irony, right? So Socrates is saying things that are we must doubt. This I mentioned, Leo Strauss brings out that he challenges the English, which have become really the analytic philosophy, dominant philosophy of being too unimaginative. So the old English Plato scholars who were extremely erudite and very good, nonetheless, he said they lacked imagination. And one of the things he means here is that they didn't ask such things as, here we have a discussion ex tempore, and Socrates and they people like Barnett, old 19th century scholar, maybe died around 1920 or so. I'm not sure. Who made these translations of the Republic? They act as though everyone in the discussion was fully informed about the whole Platonic philosophy and thinking, rather than people taking part on the spot in a discussion where they don't, like we as the reader, have the chance to sit back and think things over and meditate over things, but they're pictured by Plato as being in a live discussion where they don't know everything and they're responding with their resources at the moment. And so other such issues as this come into Strauss's critique of the readings from the English world of Plato. But you can see there where words already from the beginning decay and so have these deep difficulties lodged in them. So like Olympidorus, when he gave his sort of epitome of the Platonic philosophy, and through this exchange with the young Plato and the tyrant Dionysius at Syracuse, supposedly the tyrant who's sitting looking very resplendent and as though he were flourishing, asked Plato, thinking that Plato might flatter him, this young man who's come from Athens to Syracuse, who do you think, Plato, is the happiest man alive? And Plato says Socrates. So you see how this is, in the same way, this idea of the and happy here is the eudaimonia. So the sense of which brings out all kinds of problems, because the daimon is sort of the inner thing which corresponds in a way to the conscious or the inner voice or to the gods, and but it's thought somehow as being the spontaneous, being the motor of our movement in our life and our whole. It's thought in a way like personality, like they say, personality is fate, right? So by saying Dionysus, by virtue of having this life as the tyrant and the ruler of the owner, as it were, of Syracuse, and this wonderful life. This is all the macrocosm of his personality, and the microcosm of his personality and the macrocosm of his whole life. There seem to go together, and therefore, this is the eudaimonia as it's understood by him. And then you can see that this is both in the content of what eudaimonia means operatively, as it were, and also what it means in this other sense of its content, where Socrates has a totally different kind of life. He's in 10,000-fold poverty, as Leo Strauss used to put it. And his main thing is pretending to be dead, as it were, and talking in the shadows of the house, and growing pale. Socrates is described as being pale in some scenes, which seems to mean that, like women who gossip in the houses and don't get out in the sun, are pale. According to the way of life of the Athenians at the time. You can see that there's a dynamism in life out of which the question of what these words mean and are meant to mean grows. So when we think about it this way, language being the house of being has it reminds somehow me of the Aristotle saying that the spider has a techne in building its web, just like just in that the fact that here the spider has an art. So it shows that Aristotle is thinking in a way that we might not have supposed that he was thinking if we think of art as something specific to humans. So we should try to see the house of being in all the facets we can see it in, but at the same time, I'm asking here, when we have something which can be broken up into facets, into different parts, is this not ontic rather than ontological? Is this not a question of the philosophy that Heidegger sees as being prior to him and describing the whole of the first inception? So this problem is difficult in that we could think of language as taking on this meaning of being always something split and describing things that are ontic through Plato, through the specification of the theory that the essence of man is reason, and that reason has to do in a certain way of being able to name one thing, this redwood tree, and being able to speak about it and to hold it apart from the other things, and that goes into this whole attempt to grasp the laws of logic or language once it's been analyzed into certain rules and so forth.